Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to begin by giving our praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Rekha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and to the apostle of Great Millstone, and then our respected brothers that they're pushing and spreading the gospel of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai to the forecasters of the world. Now, through the supreme power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, I just wanted to do a quick lesson on this article, which is entitled "The Greatest Threat Facing Britain May Soon Be the U.S., but the establishment won't recognize it." And before I get into this article, actually it's from, The Guardian. But before I read it, this is the book of Revelation, chapter 17, verse 16. "And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore." And when you read the book of Revelations, the whore, that great whore, represents Babylon, and it's America. And it sits upon a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. And these represent the NATO and EU, right? Because that's the same, these are the nations that made up the, Roman Empire and the subsequent kingdoms that came, after its downfall, okay? And so the whole history of the ancient Roman Empire and even the breakdown of the book of Daniel, the 7th chapter, will let you know that all this happened over there in what we now know as Western Europe. And so NATO and EU talks about these nations. These are the beast. So they will hate the whore, which is America, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. All right. So this is prophecy. How does it play out in real life, right? Well, we have a potential, or at least we have a what's the word I'm looking for? A motive for that, right? A lot of people try to figure out, well, how, when we talk about prophecy, about how Russia is going to destroy America, or how America is going to have to fight against the entire world and lose and become a desolate wilderness, people often wonder how that can possibly happen, because the world they're living in, there hasn't been any clue or any evidence to the world heading in that direction. And so it's unimaginable to them. But the Lord, according to the book of Isaiah, the 66th chapter, said that he would appeal to our joy, which is why lately, in these last few years, prophecies have been popping off, and we've actually been overwhelmed by, articles, breaking news, and it's just a beautiful thing that the Lord is doing. So this is just another one of it. So I'm going to read the title again. It says, "The greatest threat facing Britain may soon be the U.S. One of the things that the depleted, often denigrated British state is still pretty good at is persuading the public that another country is a threat. As a small wall-like island next to a much larger landmass, Britain has had centuries of practice in cultivating its own sense of foreboding. Arguably, preparing for conflict with some part of the outside world is our natural mindset. Warning about potential enemy countries are spread by our prime ministers and major political parties, intelligence services and civil servants, serving and retiring military officers, defense and foreign affairs think tanks, and journalists from the right and the left. Sometimes the process is relatively subtle and covert. Reporters or MPs are giving off the record briefings about our national security, a potently imprecise term facing a new threat. Right, and this is why whenever you hear this word, don't just think of it as, national security, but they come out here and tell you that it's a potently imprecise term, and it means something more than the word taken at face value. This is something that Esau does very well. And so, I'm going to jump here. It says, but with whom, right? Britain is already in an undeclared war, but with whom? Since the end of the Second World War, according to the British security state, our most likely enemy has usually been Russia. Its invasion of Ukraine has prompted that message to be disseminated once again, whether under the sea or in the sky or land or in a digital space. The biggest threat to this country is widely assumed comes from the East, right? Because that's the propaganda that has been pushed, and that's not just propaganda. That's been the way it is. It's always been the East versus the West. But you have coalitions. You have the coalition of the West. Suddenly they are turning their back towards the one of the Western members, which is America. And that's why the next paragraph says, yet Donald Trump's ever more erratic, aggressive, and often outright hostile presidency. That assumption feels ever more simplistic. The Greenland crisis is just the latest, starkest example of this administration's deep antipathy to relatively liberal Europe, including Britain. So far, it has led to fundamental disputes over free speech, tariffs, the climate crisis, multiculturalism, military spending, international law, and the regulation of tech companies, the rise of hard-right populism, U.S. interference in foreign election, and the government and policing of diverse European cities, such as London. Earlier this month, the director of the respected British think tank, Brown, said that Western countries must now contemplate what was unthinkable: to defend itself against the United States in both trade and security. Get this, in both trade and security. She went on, it's not a grandiose to call this the end of Western alliance, right? How prepared is Britain for this huge shift? Many voters already seems to be adjusting. A recent poll by the Opinion found that 32% regard the United States as a threat. Call Allah Yahweh Bahashem Yahushai. Call Allah Yahweh Bahashem Yahushai, man. Which is significantly higher than before Trump returned to office. Despite the centuries of cultural, economic, and social ties between the two countries, millions of Britons appear to have no difficulty understanding that the Trump administration is not on our side, however frightening this prospect may be. In today's volatile world, voters are learning to be flexible in their global outlook. Yeah, people have stopped being loyal to the faction they belong to. Everyone is trying to, they're trying to figure, there's so much confusion. People are switching sides, and eventually, once all the chaos settles down, and we finally find out who has settled where, the scripture says that in the last days, it'll be America and Amalek against the world, or against anyone who's capable of fighting in a war. That's why the book of Revelation, the 20th chapter, it says that the downfall of it all comes by way of Gog and Magog, right? And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sands of the sea. Right? That's not saying that only Russia alone would be as though as the sand of the sea, but it says that because in the book of Ezekiel, the 38th chapter, which is already referenced here, and in the book in 39th chapter, it tells you that they had many nations with them, and they came up and went up to the breadth of the world, earth, and compassed the camp of the saints about. In other words, they're going to go to the land of Israel, right? The scripture even says, "Thou Palestinian." So really, it's going to be the whole region between the Red Sea and the Euphrates, and Israel is part of that land also. Really, that whole land is the land of Israel, right? That was what was promised to Abraham, which actually it goes past the Red Sea. It begins from the river of Egypt, as it says. So I'm gonna, let's see. But for people or institutions more invested in the status quo, accepting its collapse or decay may be harder. The Anglo-American special relationship has been central to Westminster and Whitehall's political thinking and activities for more than 80 years. Other sites of often secret collaboration are scattered across Britain, from the GCHQ Surveillance Center in Cheltenham, which works with U.S. intelligence, to our nuclear-armed submarines at Foslane in Scotland with their U.S.-maintained missiles, from 13 U.S. Air Force bases to the American ambassador's vast residence, Winfield House, which has the second biggest garden in London after Buckingham Palace. Okay? And that Anglo-American special relationship, a lot of people don't know that even America's nuclear program, it was given to them by Britain. Britain came up with it, and they gave it to them, and then they developed a bomb from a research that was damn near complete. And then they turn around and boast, and they cut Britain from it. They said they wouldn't share that knowledge. So the Spirit of the Lord is working. His determination is to gather what? The nations, that he may pour upon them his indignation. Now, when someone says, well, how is that going to happen? You don't really got to say much. Just show them articles like this. And then there's some articles. So ultimately says the British state believed that its American relationship is essentially unchanged, or can be adjusted, or can be extended in a diminished form for a few years, or it can do some new thinking. So the Spirit forces them to admit prophecy working, and then they try to come around and say, well, they try to make the situation, they try to make light of the actual situation. But we who are well informed in the Spirit know that the counsel of the Lord shall stand. Okay? And so, what was it? There was a bunch of articles that came out where the United Kingdom, actually, the entire Western Europe, or at least the members of NATO, they were complaining, and of the EU, they were saying, you know, it's kind of crazy how Babylon is always talking about how weak they are compared to Babylon, and he calls NATO, they call NATO weak, and all kinds of names, but NATO is actually pretty capable. A lot of the weapons that Ukraine used to make a formidable defense against Russia came from Europe. Another thing also is that if the ideal of America is that it won't associate itself with nations who are weak and have no interest of strengthening themselves, well then why mess around with Amalek in the first place? They can't do any fighting. America has done all their fighting for them. All the nations, all the nations in the Middle East that America has come to contact with, it's because of Amalek. America's been doing all of Amalek's fighting. American money, American blood, right? When they started a war with Iran, it was America that came in and did it for them. When they start a war, it's American money that funds that war. It's American money that gives them the weapon. American gave them the Iron Dome. American gave them the Golden Dome. But you don't hear Trump talking bad about them. You don't hear him saying, "Oh, we don't. What the hell is Amalek? Why do we need Amalek for? Why should we pay attention to Amalek? America first, forget Amalek." But they don't do that because there's some shady shit going on in the background, and also ultimately it's for prophecy. In closing, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Recha Kodash, Shalom, Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Brakatam, Tohi, Akim, Sanakwis, that are listening in truth and sincerity. May the blessing of bless you be upon the house. And until next time, Shalom.